we talked about Black Lives Matter. For people that are watching this right now on Facebook Live or seeing it later on YouTube when I'll re-put it out there, um, why is that an important phrase? What I mean is, you saw it, I saw it, uh, a number of years ago when that became a thing. What I mean is, it became a phrase, it became a hashtag or whatever, and people, white people mostly, reacted to. Well, wait a minute, all lives matter. What about the blue lives, right? I mean, and you can understand that reaction too. I can understand it. Tell me why it matters that we say Black Lives Matter and believe it.
Well, I think it's just a matter of recognizing that someone is there, and giving them assurance that they're valued, their life is valued. So of course, all lives matter. I mean, of course, this is anyone who says Black Lives Matter, at least the people that I know, there's always going to be extremists on each end, right? Sure. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. There's going to be extreme people on the Black Lives Matter. There's going to be extreme people over here that are racist white people. Most of those people you're probably not going to reach anyway, so let them be where they're at. The majority of us need to understand that the reason why a lot of people say Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter is important is because what I just referenced to last time is that oftentimes we've seen Black people get killed. And in this context, we're talking about by police. And no convictions come about that. And so you start to wonder, does my life matter when people are allowed to kill people that look like me?
Let me interrupt. Does your life matter to people of power?
Yes.
I mean, that's really the thing, because the retort constantly comes back, well, all this black on black crime, how come Black lives don't matter then?
And I'm going to touch on that as well. But
but speaking to people in authority or in power, they have to be reminded that some people aren't less than others. Where that goes to it in my own mind.
And it matters enough to hold someone accountable when they take a life. When there is black on black crime, and I'm gonna talk about that, but even with that, when they find the black person who killed the other black person, they generally go to jail.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about the people that, the Black Lives Matter slogan came from. People were being killed, black people were being killed, and there was no accountability. So I need you to say that my life matters and mean it. And to talk about black on black crime, anybody who's followed me on Facebook knows that I talk about this stuff all the time. It's uncomfortable conversations, but I learned from sports. Everything that I've learned in business, I've learned in sports. And sometimes you become really good at something, learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Getting up and running sprints, running miles to get in shape, lifting weights. That's uncomfortable, but it produces something better in the end. And so I'm not that uncomfortable having these conversations. I always say there's two things going on in America simultaneously. There's systematic racism, which I'll explain some examples, because a lot of times people say that and they're like, what do you mean? There's systematic racism and there's lack of accountability in black neighborhoods. Those two things are happening simultaneously.
Yeah, it's not one or the other. That's so important. People want to say,
it's not one or the other.
What about this? Well, that doesn't discount the other.
It's not one or the other. Sometimes we're having a conversation about this one topic, about systematic racism, and it may not be the time to talk about this over here. And then other times, and I do it all the time here at my YMCA, there's all type of forums, there's all type of nonprofits. What we just talked about, the renovation here, is going to address some of the things with black on black crime here. And as we're talking about black on black crime here, and when we started talking about the $2.5 million renovation and the education, it wasn't time to talk about systematic racism. There's a time for each, and then there's a time for both. And I recognize that there is issues in both. And so when I say systematic racism, what I mean by that is a couple things. Like, I give people the example of redlining. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably need to educate yourself even more, but for anybody out there listening, but redlining was a practice where you drew off parts of neighborhoods where basically black people had to stay. And the Fair Housing Act of 1968 basically put into a law that before 1968, only 2% of loans were given to black people to own homes. In 1968, that, there was a law passed where you couldn't discriminate on that anymore. It's still happening, but they passed the law. And so what I say about that is, If that happened in 1968, most black people didn't have generational wealth at that time. They didn't have great credit. So they, even though the law was passed, they still couldn't go get loans for the most part. So me being born in 1977, or people around my age, is really the first generation that really had fair access to own a home. And the reason that's important is we all know that if you don't own something, if you don't own something, you don't put your investment to it, you don't value it as much. It's the same way why most of us blue collar parents say, you know what, when my kid wants a car, I'm gonna make him get a job at McDonald's and save up some money instead of just buying it and giving it to him, because once he saved up his own money and bought it, he's gonna wash it, he's gonna clean it, he's gonna take care of it because he knows how much it took to earn it. Considering that most black people were discriminated against to be able to own land, own homes, you don't place as much value on property. And because we've never owned it, not we, but generally, historically speaking, right? This has been done systematically through racism, right? The denial, even as early as a few years ago, there was a study in Atlanta that said it was more likely for banks to give poor white people loans versus middle class black people homes. And so if you can't own and you can't get an investment into America, it's going to be much easier for you to tear down this man's building because you've never owned it. You probably feel some anger that you haven't been given a fair opportunity to earn your own. And so that's one part of systematic racism. Another thing is education. My crux of this is just trying to make sure we can educate our youth so they can graduate college and they can have a better opportunity to earn a living to take care of their family. I think property taxes funding schooling is another part of systematic racism. Because if you've already created these red line districts, there's houses in the St. Louis community, North St. Louis, where I work, that are worth $1. They sell them for $1. They sell them for $20,000, $40,000, maybe $80,000. Homes out in Olivet and Ladue and Creve Coeur are $400, $500, $800,000, $1 million. So if we're taking the property taxes from houses that aren't worth much and funding the schools, you see why people are getting a subpar education and people in suburbs are getting a much better education. That's systematic racism. We can change that, we just have not. And so now you have people who are getting subpar educations, and now with the subpar education, you can't get a job to earn as much money. And studies show, whether it's in America, whether you're black, whether you're white, India, China, if you have poverty and you have low education, that's what produces crime. Mm-hmm. It's not skin color. It's if you right now, I mean, maybe you wouldn't, but most parents always say, I would never commit a crime, but if you're at home and your child doesn't have something to eat multiple days in a row, most people are going to say, I'm going to do what it takes to feed my family. Even if I got to break a law or two, I'm not going to sit here and watch my child starve. So if we know that we've been putting people in a position to where they can't get the high quality education they deserve to earn the money to be able to live legally, that's systematic racism, in my opinion. And so those things can change. To go on black crime, 1,000% correct. We don't hold each other accountable enough on that. We don't tell on the man down the street when we know he committed a crime. This no snitching thing has gone way too far. And so these are things that I'm working on in my community and others, not just me. Oftentimes, white people don't think these conversations are happening because oftentimes they aren't being invited to the table for those conversations. Because quite frankly, it doesn't really concern you at that point. We need to talk to you about systematic racism. We're talking to our own community and our own people about black on black crime. And obviously it's not working enough because there's too much of it. But to think that most black people, again, there's extremes that don't care. But I would say the majority of black people, to think that we don't know that there's problems going on in our own community. I tell people all the time, when you drive down the street in North St. Louis, you see trash on the street. Some of that is because there's not as many trash pickups. Some of that is because we're throwing trash out the window of our car. White people aren't driving through North St. Louis littering. They're not even coming to North St. Louis. That's us. That's right. Us. We're hurting our own property value by littering in our own neighborhoods. I have these conversations with people, Harry. I have these conversations. Other leaders in our community have these conversations with people about going to vote. We're not seeing the results we want to see yet, but I do want to make it clear that there's black on black, there's black on black, and there's black on black crime, and there's a need for more accountability amongst us to make sure that we are coming home from work when possible, to check our child's homework, show up to PTA meetings, right? Sometimes it's a single mom, she's working 2 jobs, she just can't. But for the ones that can, to come home and make sure that you're checking your kids' homework, showing up to PTA meetings, telling the young man down the street, don't behave like that. Those things are happening, and that we need more accountability. That doesn't take away from systemic racism, and and so there's 2 things going on, and that's how I see that.
It's amazing. I can't keep you forever. Obviously, I know you got a million other things and to get to. In a sentence or two, I don't mean it has to be only 1 or 2 sentences, but I'm thinking like a bullet points. What do you think most folks that look like me don't understand about what's going on in the African American community?
Wow, that's a good one. I would say that, like even where I work, it's the area I serve here in North St. Louis. The average household income is $27,000 per household, versus the state average of about 53,000. So there's a lot of people living in poverty. There are a lot of awesome people. I've been working at this YMCA for 4 years, and the people that come through these doors are ultra respectful. They say, they speak to each other. The point I'm getting at is 95% of the people that I come across in this community, and it's a poor community. It's hard to live here. You have the right to be angry and frustrated. 95% of the people are trying to do better, and they're trying to live a good life. That 5% is a bad 5%. They're in gangs. They are looting. They are doing things that dominate the attention of the news. And you hear that voice a lot louder than you hear of the good people just living a day-to-day life, right? And so I think that would be one thing, is that there's a lot of good people that are just trying to do the same thing you're trying to do. That's the number. I hear people think that over here there's a lot of bad Black people. It's not the case. I think that another thing that I would say is children end up making mistakes in part because of what they've been taught or what they haven't been taught. And so I tell people, a lot of times you'll see a 17, 18-year-old kid in school, and I've gotten to this argument before, and they're like, or he drops out of school, and they're like, this is the land of the free. You can go to school for free. You can get on the internet and learn. Well, a lot of people don't have the extra money to get internet here in these situations. But when you put people in a situation where they have to survive, and there's a single mom who's working 2 jobs, when the child gets home from school at 12 years old, and other kids come knock on the door, and they say, hey, you want to come out and play? For some reason, we think that this 12-year-old Black kid is going to say, no, hey, guys, I got to do my homework for 3 hours.
I'm going to college someday.
I can't go play.
Right.
That's about 1% of kids, Black or white.
Mm-hmm.
If your friend asks you to come over and there's not a parent at home, you're going to go out and play. I was in college, and I was 20-something years old, and I knew I had a test on Monday. And if my friend said, hey, you want to go out Saturday night? It was hard to say no to that. And so we put too much responsibility on these kids who are living in single parent homes to make the right decision at 12, 13, 14 years old. Then what happens is they do go outside and play, and then they get caught up in some activities and around people that they shouldn't. And so I think that's why I think it's so important to have fair justice systems, because as we see, sometimes we see stats show that Black people get harsher penalties for the same crimes. And so if we're breaking up families, if people are committing crimes, they need to go to jail, white or Black. But we got to stop where Black people are being held more accountable for the same crimes and breaking up families. Because when you break up those families, now you got single parents at home working multiple jobs, and now kids are being left without a mentor, without a mom, without a father to tell them, no, you can't go outside until you finish your homework. Most of our parents said that, right? Or you can go play, just be back home at 6, and then we're going to do your homework before you go to bed. If you don't have that parent in the household doing that, then you get, and then what I see all the time is you don't see it right away. 12 years old, not that bad. 13 years old, you start to fall a little bit behind. 14 years old, now all of a sudden you're even more behind. Now you're in high school and you're a couple grade levels behind math and reading. And what do kids do when they get called on? Any teacher or educator out there can vouch for this. What do kids do when they don't know? They either shut down or they act out and they become class clowns. And then what happens is when you're a black kid who, instead of just saying, I don't know, now you feel embarrassed and you either just shut down, which makes it worse, or you act out, whether through negative behavior or being a class clown, that now you get suspended. Now that you see where that goes,
Yeah,
right? And it all
absolutely.
started with breaking up the family. And so I think, having stronger families and having equal punishments among races to make sure that we're developing the family, that would be another thing that I would hope that people would understand.
Listen, we need to do this again. Here's my final question, though. I need to let you go. I'm going to flip it back to sports. We've seen a lot of coaches, a lot of athletic directors, a lot of professional athletes, and so forth stand up and speak out in this hour, and more than I think I ever remember. And I want to say in thoughtful ways, and there's the controversy of the last 2 days about Drew Brees and the anthem and all that, and but I do think that athletes, entertainers, all those kinds of people, but I think in particular athletes, because young people and somehow see a Marcus Wilson, they go, man, he's just not good at acting like he's in love with a girl. He showed a skill, a hard work to be able to bounce that ball, put it in the hoop, and so forth. LeBron's been speaking out, and people admire his work ethic. And so there's a credibility and a gravitas, as they say, that maybe a LeBron James can have, or even Drew Brees. I mean, for setting aside the controversy of what he said and then apologized and all that, do you think it's important for coaches, and in particular white coaches? Conzo Martin spoke out very, boldly, at Mizzou. How important do you think it is for coaches in particular, and particularly white coaches, to be speaking out in this hour?
100% important. And for me, everybody might have a different reason as to why they think they should. But for me, the facts of the matter is, you look at the NFL, you look at basketball, college basketball, NBA. 70% of those athletes are African American. And so if you're bringing 70%, and we know how much money college football generates, we know how much money the NFL and NBA generates. And so if we know that these coaches are recruiting these African American kids to their program and making money, you need to be able to empathize with their pain and be able to empathize when these things are going wrong, and stand up and not be silent. Because you're not silent when you want to go to their home and recruit recruit them and get them to come to your school to help you win games. What's more important, winning games or making sure this kid has a fair shot at life and that he's going to be treated with equity when he graduates? And these coaches have an opportunity to affect that, because like you said, in sports, it's not that I'm different than another black person. And LeBron James, it's just we have a bigger platform. And so what are you doing with your platform? Coaches, CEOs as well, but we're talking about coaches. When you have that platform, people listen to you. Nick Saban, when he talks, people in Alabama listen.
Yeah.
Right. And so if he can say something that will make someone in Alabama say, I never thought about it that way. And if Nick Saban is thinking that way, well, maybe I should try. If that just happens with 10% of the people that heard Nick Saban talk, imagine the change that could occur from that, because now that those 10% has changed, now they can start changing their own little circle through individual conversations when you go out to dinner, when you're playing, having barbecues in the backyard and have these conversations. So I think they have a platform, and considering the base, I think they have a responsibility to speak up, considering the high majority of African Americans that are usually on their teams.
If you're just scrolling by on Facebook, that's Marcus Wilson. I'm Harry Schrader. He was just a spectacular basketball player at Evansville. He was on the YMCA and there in North St. Louis, the Bayer YMCA, right? Bayer. There you do kind of
Bayer
sponsor.
YMCA. Yep.
And tell people again where they can see your YouTube channel, podcast, et cetera, the name of it.
It's called Details of Life with Marcus Wilson. You can search that on almost any platform. Most people watch it on YouTube because it's a video conversation just like this one, but it is also on all podcasts, not all, but the majority of major podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, and others like that. So I usually bring on retired NBA players. We've had on Larry Hughes, where Damon Stoudemire's coming on in a couple episodes, and try to bring on coaches, and we talk about not just X's and O's, but talk about life, talk about how they build a culture, talk about their experiences and things like that. So hopefully you guys can tune into that.
Appreciate your time. Thanks so much. We have to do this again. I've got like 58 more questions, but I got to let you go.
Anytime.
I'm trying to learn, brother. I'm just trying to learn, because it's so critical for us somebody said the other day, I heard somebody say something about, in the midst of all this, it was an African-American man saying, man, I've just started thinking about the Native American and what they're going through. And he said, man, I started thinking, the ripple effect of if we start to pay attention to the other person, we can change everything.
Well, I appreciate you trying to learn, and all the people out there. I've had more, honestly, I actually got a text about this today from a colleague. Said, Marcus, have you been getting a lot of texts from your white friends saying, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes. And so I think I see a lot of people trying, and I just want to, for the people that are trying and the people that want to learn, I think a lot of people are saying, what can I do? This is the start, recognizing that there needs to be change. You can't change if you don't recognize it needs to be changed. And then B, we might not all be able to change the world with one voice, but if you can around you and everybody does that, I think that's where we'll start to see those gaps close. And we can, have better conversations interracially and just across all demographic lines.
Appreciate it. Bless you. Do good there in the YMCA. What people don't know about you is this is really what you do. Like, you and I kind of shared a basketball player for a while. I was announcing his games, and you've been mentoring him, and he's a guy with a good dad. What I mean is sometimes we think mentors, no parents. That guy's got a great father, and yet you've been investing in him. And so I'm watching you do it at a distance. Like, you and I don't interact a ton, but I know your influence on somebody else that I was announcing their games and knowing how you were mentoring him. And you're the real deal. You're not just just don't talk good. You're the real deal, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on here.
Marcus, God bless. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
All righty. You've been listening and watching Marcus Wilson and me. I'm Harry Schrader right here live on Facebook. We'll get it all taped out there as well and put it out in another product as well. So you all have a great day.